Adventure Time has always been a very spiritual show, but with the release of the finale for Season 2 of Fionna and Cake, we now have a stronger look into the spiritual rules of Ooh. What is interesting, however, is that Adventure Time's mythology just follows the same rules as the real-life esoteric tradition, which is the system of spirituality that is uncovered when you cross-compare all the world's mythologies as well as their secret societies. These secret societies dealt primarily with the concept of gnosis, Greek for knowledge, which in the case of these secret societies meant achieving a certain level of divine understanding that allows you to leave the material plane and return to God. This is something explored throughout Adventure Time, but very heavily in Season 2 of Fionna and Cake, where the secret societies are represented by the many different wizard societies, and the spiritual ascent of Huntress Wizard mirrors the story of a secret society initiate, with Huntress Wizard trying to ascend spiritually while also trying to stop Finn from leaving the mortal realm. With all of that in mind, let's go back to the beginning of Adventure Time, and as they said in the very end of Fionna and Cake's Season 2 finale, reveal their Gnostic secrets.
He's gonna blab all our Gnostic secrets.
The Land of Ooh exists on a planet that was once our Earth, before half of it was destroyed in the explosions of the Great Mushroom War. This was a nuclear type event that helped bring magic back to this land. But magic itself had always existed since the beginning of its universe. Much like with our real-life mythologies, the origins of the Adventure Time universe are presented as chaos. In this earliest time of primordial existence and non-existence, primordial beasts rose out of the chaos created by Gulb. This includes important figures within the show, such as the Lich, Orgolorg, Kokon Tepe, and the Heart of the Forest in the new season of Fionna and Cake. One thing we will be exploring a lot in this video is the concept of entities on planet Earth slowly ascending to become greater spiritual beings. And in real life, it's the entities of chaos from our different mythologies which are the first spirits to have ascended to a higher plane. A great example of this is the Babylonian mythology, where the parent gods are the gods of the sea and the gods of the rivers. Two chaotic waters that intermingle and give birth to the rest of the gods, representing the rest of the world, but which were used to represent the more chaotic ancestor spirits of early humanity before people became more civilized and their angels with them. In Adventure Time, these primordial giants exist all over the universe, but many of them seem to have been sent to Earth specifically in order to have it be their prison. This is also something we'll be exploring a bit in the real-life mythologies, with the idea that certain entities are actually pushed from up above to our world down below in order to serve as a type of prison for them. This is most obvious in the Zoroastrian mythology, where you have the tale of the god of light, Ormazd, and the god of darkness, Ahriman. In order for light to exist in the Zoroastrian religion, darkness has to exist as well. But due to the nature of the light casting the shadow, the light has a head start against the darkness and can work on ways to contain it. In Zoroastrian mythology, our entire existence was created just so that the evil spirit can be trapped within it, with the god of light trying to convince the god of darkness that this creation was something of great importance to the god of light in order to lure the god of dark in with the intent to ruin it for him. The best example of this within the show is Orgolorg, who worked for the Ice King until the end of the original Adventure Time series. Originally, Gunther was a being known as Orgolorg, who had conquered a lot of the universe and who had scared much of the universe with his great power. In order to imprison Orgolorg, he was banished to Earth where he would take on the form of Gunther, forgetting his true self as long as he's within the Earth's atmosphere. Another way entities can be sent to the Earth, however, is through the catalyst comets that come once every 1,000 years. We learned about this in the episode Evergreen, where we see a great comet coming towards the Earth that's supposed to contain a spirit so vile that it has to be stopped before it destroys everything. These comets are said to come once every 1,000 years with big changes that come with them, but not enough to destroy the planet. With this comet being special, of course, because it has the Lich, who desires to end all life in existence, returning them to their origin, the chaos of Gulb. Now, the thing about the Catalyst Comets is that it's not just sending primordial beings as prisoners like the Lich, but also other entities that are meant to change Ooh, and who are implied to also be changed by Ooh. The greatest example of this is Finn himself, who we learn was actually one of these comets in the distant past. Unlike the Lich comet, the comet containing Finn and his family wasn't one of pure evil. But what happened to Finn is very similar to what happened to Orgolorg, and that makes sense considering we learn a lot about this in the episode where Orgolorg tries to intercept one of these catalyst comets in order to contain its power for himself. Like Gunther, Finn doesn't have any memories of any other existence while he's on the Earth, but once he's pulled out of the atmosphere and given the push by this new catalyst comet to rethink his past, Finn realizes that he himself was once a catalyst comet and that he had many forms on the planet. This seemed to involve Finn slowly working his way up through different forms of life, starting with simpler life like butterflies, before eventually becoming a human with multiple incarnations. This is the big hint that the Catalyst Comets aren't just here to change the planet, which Finn definitely has with his presence, but that those sent by the Catalyst Comet are also meant to go through some change themselves. The Lich wasn't sent to the planet in order to destroy it, or even just the land of U after all, but after seemingly millions of years of being frozen within it, and then finally escaping thanks to the Great Mushroom Wars, the Lich is eventually just turned into a living child, going from an entity of death to an entity that represents rebirth. Of course, a big thing that's explored when Finn has this experience is the idea that he is allowed to ascend once he understands his nature. The opportunity for a new mode of existence, to become something else if you so choose. And this of course is a pretty big theme throughout the entire second season of Fionna and Cake, with a lot of figures experiencing great falls as well as great spiritual rises throughout the season, with these falls and their rises often being presented as something of a punishment in order to help the characters grow and become the better versions of themselves that they need to be in the cosmic hierarchy. The best example of this in the new season is the story of the two brothers, which seems to be a reference to a lot of different myths found throughout the world. In this story within Adventure Time, there were two brothers who were joined together, creating mischief in the higher dimensions that we would think of as heavenly realms. The two end up pushing the limits of the abuse of their power for fun when they decide to eat the forbidden pizza, an obvious reference to the fruit of forbidden knowledge and its parallels in the different religious mythologies. For this crime, the two are separated, and they're given two different roles that, from a mortal's perspective, can make them seem like very important characters in the cosmic hierarchy. This is particularly true for the brother who didn't experience the Great Fall, who was given the role of being the cosmic owl, delivering different dreams and especially croak dreams to different people. His brother who did fall, however, became the karmic worm, something much less glamorous overall, but which also gave him the ability to think of everything wrong he had done both with his brother and against his brother, with the same being true for the cosmic owl as well. The thing in the show, however, as well as real-life esoterica, is that these beings don't just fall for no reason. We've already explained the idea that this fall can be a punishment or a prison, but we've also shown the idea that it's supposed to rehabilitate, and at some point, when rehabilitated, you're also supposed to ascend back up, to leave the prison that you were in and take on a new role more in line with what you have learned from your previous experience. And finally, that takes us back to Finn, and the real focus of this journey as we begin to break down the mythology of the Adventure Time universe even more. Finn is from one of many Catalyst Comets, with each one coming every 1,000 years. But Finn is implied to be something more than the average Catalyst Comet. When he talks to the new Catalyst Comet that's hurtling towards the Earth, it's indicated that Finn himself might actually be the source of this Catalyst Comet. That he didn't just fire off towards the Earth before this comet, but that he is of some power or source that comes before both of them. The new season had heavily set up the idea that Finn might die and have some great ascension, but that of course was delayed until some time in the future, with another episode in Adventure Time Distant Lands implying that even when Finn dies much older, he's still gonna make the choice to return to the Earth and have another adventure. But the entire story of Fionna and Cake Season 2 does deal with the idea that Finn does have some sort of destiny that he is supposed to ascend to, that he can play pretend or live these imaginary lives as he says to the Catalyst Comet, but that underneath all of that, there's some bigger purpose that he's supposed to serve with his eventual return up high. In Adventure Time and much of the spiritual traditions of esoterica, the idea is that the final stop on the ascension upward is actually a return to chaos and nothingness. And while there have been some moments even in the original Adventure Time series where Finn was dangerously close to passing through Golb, I think the entire point of this last season of Fionna and Cake is that Finn's ultimate destiny is to become Golb himself. This is something that we know is possible in the Adventure Time universe because Betty herself had ascended to this role and become the new Golb. But like the Golb before her, I believe she is meant to be replaced, and that the person replacing her, namely Finn, is supposed to be a more permanent fixture that will change how existence and reality operates in the Adventure Time multiverse. But to start, let's talk about that process of ascension both in Adventure Time and in real life. Now, in real life, our spiritual world is dealt with largely by these secret societies, and thus in Adventure Time, their spiritual world is dealt with largely by their different wizard societies. In Season 2 of Fionna and Cake, we got a strong focus on the Green Wizard Society that Huntress Wizard is a part of, seeing her initiation into their ranks, as well as the group falling apart when Huntress Wizard decides to take the Heart of the Forest power for herself in order to save Finn. The Green Wizard Society is just one of many societies seen throughout the show, however, with most of our interaction with these societies coming from episodes focusing on Wizard City. Wizard City itself is essentially a secret society with all of the other wizard societies within it. But like with the real-life secret societies, all these wizard societies seem to have a similar initiation. Through Huntress Wizard, we saw that this wasn't a pure death and resurrection as we have in the real-life rituals, but rather what we saw was more of the physical exchange of power. After completing her various trials, Huntress Wizard has to cut off her own hand and offer it to the Heart of the Forest. This gives the Heart of the Forest something to sustain itself with, but it also draws the power from the Heart of the Forest into Huntress Wizard or other initiates as well. The other wizard societies are alluded to having similar rituals where they have to give something else in order to get a greater power. As for the idea of death and resurrection, that's not seen so much in the actual initiation of Huntress Wizard, and instead, it's the entire second season of Fionna and Cake that is essentially its own tiny little mystery play. This isn't the first time that Adventure Time would do something like this, as in the show's original run, there was actually at least 2 episodes where the characters act out their own version of a mystery play, but more so for the sake of comedy. This can be seen in the episode Wizards Only Fools, where Finn, Jake, and Princess Bubblegum have to sneak into Wizard City in order to get some medicine to bring a man back from the brink of death. This is a story you'll find with almost any ancient mystery play. The oldest of these that we know of is actually the initiation of the Egyptians, which was modeled after the myth of Osiris. In Egyptian mythology, Osiris was killed by his brother Set and divided into 14 pieces. In the initiation of the Egyptians, the initiate would often play the role of Osiris's wife, Isis, who has to collect the different pieces of Osiris and put him back together in order to bring him back to life for just one moment. It's this near-death experience that Osiris has that allows him to ascend and become the actual god of the underworld instead of just another soul passing through it. And by recreating his death as Osiris and resurrection through Isis, you were supposed to give a part of your soul to Osiris to keep him alive and be a part of him, while also getting a part of his power and blessings while you exist upon the earth. In the Nordic initiations, they use the myth of Balder for the same ritual. The story of Balder was that he was killed by his brother Hodor, who only did this because he was tricked by Loki because he wanted Balder dead. Your job as the initiate is to gather all the pieces of Balder and bring him back to life, only for you to realize in the end that you were actually Balder all along, working towards your own ascension. The big joke of these secret societies, however, is that the original initiate was not an initiate at all, but someone who actually had a near-death experience. These rituals simulate that in a way that connects you to that same spirit, but originally someone else had to actually die first. This is important because to emphasize this, different secret societies often have the initiate being guided by someone else who provides the spiritual passwords for them. This is one of the big jokes in Wizards Only Fools, where Princess Bubblegum and the others can't get into the city without a password, but instead of just getting the password themselves, they actually need another wizard to speak it for them, before entering Wizard City, where they would have a series of trials leading to them getting the medicine they need in order to bring their friend back from the brink of death. Now, with Osiris and Balder, we mostly get the idea of noble ancestor spirits guiding us to a peaceful world, with Balder in particular being described in his myths as being resurrected in a peaceful world after all the warring gods have died. But there are also certain mystery cults that have been accused of trying to bring about an evil spirit, which is something we of course see in Adventure Time a lot. Even primordial beings like the Lich access the powers of chaos and darkness associated with Golb in order to try and bring about his will. But other wizard societies in Adventure Time are just worshipping these other primordial forces, or rather tapping into their powers through these initiation ceremonies. This doesn't just include the Heart of the Forest with the Green Wizard Society, but also Kokon Tepe hiding beneath Wizard City, with the Kokon Tepe plotline from distant lands likely being inspired by the accusations against the Knights Templar. On paper, the Knights Templar were just a group of knights that helped guided people into Israel for people to experience the land religiously. However, the Knights Templar were accused, among many other things, of inheriting the legacy of the mystery school of the Gnostics, which you'll remember were actually name-dropped at the end of Season 2, when one of the wizards claimed that Finn was going to reveal all of their Gnostic secrets. After spending some time building up wealth and power by helping people travel to Israel, they were eventually accused of devil worship by a French king who was indebted to them, leading to the Knights Templar all being tortured and then executed after giving confessions that they were worshipping demons and evil spirits. Among those many claims against them is the idea that they were worshipping an entity known as Baphomet, and later groups trying to start their own version of Satanism would actually use the image of Baphomet as their symbol for the devil. However, with the Knights Templar being rooted in Gnosticism, we actually get a wildly different story of whose spirit they were trying to empower. In Gnosticism, there is a death and resurrection ritual in addition to the written text that they have. But according to their most comprehensive texts, like Pisti Sophia, the goal of this ritual is to put enough purified souls into the treasury of light so that Jesus may rule for 1,000 years before ascending to an even higher plane. This is a reference to the real-life book of Revelation within the Bible, where Jesus is described as not being able to complete the apocalyptic events of the fifth seal until there is a correct number of martyred souls, or souls that have gone through a torturous death, such as represented in these death and resurrection rituals. So the idea is that wizard societies, or real-life secret societies, are meant to bring about a great spirit, and religions are just the public version of the same rituals, connecting people to spirits so powerful that they've ended up becoming our gods in the ancient world. However, despite the idea that your soul is supposed to go up and become a part of one of these greater spirits in the real-life mystery schools, the greater esoterica points to the idea that these spirits, while powerful, are only as powerful as the level that they have ascended to. More souls mean more power, but that doesn't necessarily mean a higher ascension. The goal, as we said earlier, is that these spirits are supposed to eventually rise above and return to the source that they came from, what we might think of as the universe as a whole, or the one true God, or that which Adventure Time depicts as the chaos ruled by Golb. A nothingness from which everything comes, but to which everything, even the Lich, will eventually return. But there are two competing schools of thought of what this return to Golb is supposed to be. We've talked a lot about the many different mystery traditions that existed all over the world, but over time, those were condensed into two key systems. Don't get me wrong, there are many, many more, but for the last 2,000 years, the two most important mystery systems have been Gnosticism and the Kabala. Gnosticism is essentially just Christianity with esotericism, and Kabbalah is the same thing for Judaism, with a lot of the Kabbalah actually just being Gnosticism without the reverence for Jesus. Both systems, for instance, rely on the idea that some humans have a divine spark within them known as wisdom, referred to as Sophia in the Greek and Chokmah in Hebrew. In Gnosticism, the goal has always been to have your divine light return to the heavens above, not just ascending to become an angel, but eventually returning to the highest of all dimensions. In Judaism, however, there's the belief that if you return to this highest dimension, that you will lose your sense of identity and free will. In both Gnosticism and the Jewish Kabbalah, there are three spiritual worlds that exist above our physical world. The first of these is a lower realm we would think of as being for the lower angels, divine entities, often our more recent ancestors, who work under the greater gods that are in the world above. It's in this second dimension above that first one that we get the characters we think of as gods in the various religions, with figures like Zeus, Osiris, Balder, and even the Jewish angel Metatron, who is said to rule in this dimension within the Kabbalah. Finally, above that is the third and highest dimension, which in Adventure Time is represented by Golb. In both Gnosticism and the Kabbalah, this is the world of emanation, the home of the one true God, who's supposed to be an endless source of love with no identity. In Judaism, the problem is that returning to this source would return you to having no identity, and it's because of that that the mystery schools are actually referred to as the fruit of forbidden knowledge within the Kabbalah, which also explains why Judaism denounces Jesus, as his death and resurrection were just seen as a public version of the death and resurrection ritual of the fruit of forbidden knowledge. But according to Gnosticism, the goal of humans wasn't just to fall, but they only fell in an attempt to rise higher. The goal of Jesus and those who follow him within Gnosticism isn't just to return to a heavenly place, but to ascend back to that highest realm of emanation. Here, however, Jesus and his followers aren't supposed to become the one true God as he already exists, but instead what's supposed to happen through Jesus' fall and subsequent rise is that he's able to return to this state in a new form, in a form that was even greater than the position that it was left in. This is done based off of the will of the one true God, who has an idea of who he wants to be, or rather, who he wants to be replaced by. And by allowing Jesus and humans to fall in general, we end up getting the experiences we need on this plane before eventually filtering back up as better beings, ready to control the world in an even more loving way. Now, I mentioned before that this is something we've already seen for Betty, who is able to become Golb by wishing for a way to protect Simon and everyone else. And the only way for that to be possible was for her to become Golb herself and return to the nothingness. And if Betty can do that, I believe that means pretty much anyone else can too. Or rather, someone else is destined to do that. And while Betty may be holding this role for quite a while, and perhaps many more lifetimes, perhaps maybe even thousands of years, I think the entire point of Adventure Time is that eventually this role is supposed to be taken over by Finn. The problem with that is, in order to ascend to the highest of realms, the ancient traditions such as Hinduism describe you as needing to attain a sense of oneness with the universe that also involves letting go of everything on the earth. It's our attachments to this world that are often what causes us to fall back into it, whether for good reasons or for bad reasons. And part of ascending to a higher place in order to help everyone also means having to disconnect yourself from the emotional ties you have there in order to become part of something greater than what you are within. And I believe this is the destiny of Finn's ascension, as explored in Season 2 of Fionna and Cake. In Season 2 of Fionna and Cake, the premise was rather simple. After accidentally scratching himself on the heart of the forest back in Season 1, Finn suddenly becomes ill and begins to die. Simon, Bubblegum, and Marceline try to work together to keep him alive and bring him back, but in the end, it's going to be Huntress Wizard who has to save him, because of how it's connected to the heart of the forest. This is very similar already to the mystery story we told you of Osiris and Isis, with Osiris, the husband, dying, and the wife, in this case Huntress Wizard, having to bring him back together. What this implies, however, is that this is actually the story of Finn's initiation, not that of Huntress Wizard's, though she of course also ascends because of this journey. For Finn, we already know that he's going to die again as an older man, but even after a little bit of ascension there, once Finn reunites with Jake, the two of them decide to fall back into creation again. Even after Jake himself was shown as making it very high in the hierarchy of the spiritual universe, and having mostly let go of his attachments to the earth, such as we described before. And I believe it's also been indicated that the two do reincarnate again as the characters we see at the end of the original Adventure Time, though I don't know if this has actually been confirmed as true for Shermie and Beth. With this, it actually makes a little bit of sense that Finn didn't die at the end of this season, despite the character of Osiris also dying after his momentary resurrection. Whether or not Finn could ascend all the way up to being Golb in an instant, or requires multiple lifetimes after this one before he can return, this near-death experience during his life as Finn seems to be an important part of connecting him to his spiritual side in the afterlife, like with the death and resurrection ritual. We mentioned before about how the original death and resurrection rituals were actually just real near-death experiences that someone had. And for someone like Finn, who isn't interested in getting initiated properly into a wizard society, a true death and resurrection similar to that of Jesus would be the only way for him to get this spiritual awakening that he needs. This is why we get moments like at the end of The Bird and the Clock, where we have BMO drawing on Finn's face, and he says, "He is risen," in reference to Finn, making him sound like Jesus Christ. This is also why I think we get such a strong focus on baby Finn from the baby dimension in this season. For really no reason at all, they decided they need to take Finn out of this safe baby dimension in order to take better care of him, even though he's always getting into trouble everywhere else he goes, and doesn't have the safe baby padding of the baby dimension. This, I think, is really just supposed to remind us that Finn, whether he dies or comes back to life, is going to be reborn in a way. And what's really important about this is in the butterfly in the river, it's baby Finn who gets these butterfly wings, representing even more so a transformation. The butterfly, of course, is just the final form of the caterpillar, with cocoons and butterflies often being used to represent great change and metamorphosis, the old version of you dying completely in order to become something entirely new. And what's terrifying about that with baby Finn is that these butterfly wings seem to be a clear and obvious reference to Golb, something I didn't actually notice until fellow YouTuber Sarcastic Chorus pointed it out to me. Early on in the season, I thought all of this mystery school initiation symbolism meant that Finn was really going to die at the end of this season. But looking back, it makes a lot more sense that this is supposed to be a transformative experience for Finn, not just his end. That this is something necessary and painful that Finn has to go through in order to ascend and become the greater being he is meant to be, but that doesn't mean he needs to do that actual ascension at this time. And then finally, there's Huntress Wizard. It's important to note that in Gnosticism, it's said that no one can actually ascend to the same level of Jesus or in the same way. And while he does need souls of righteous people to help rule with him for 1,000 years, the Gnostic texts clearly show Jesus as returning to the one true God and its source, with the divine light of wisdom, or Sophia, becoming the entity Sophia in a realm below. This happens only after the different divine sparks of Sophia are gathered from the different people that they are trapped in. And of course, we see a lot of this symbolism with Huntress Wizard. Early in the season, she wanted to use the essence from within the heart of the forest in order to heal Finn, but this ended up causing the heart of the forest to awaken and then rip a hole in reality, causing Huntress Wizard and the leader of the Green Wizard Society to both be sucked in. Here on this spiritual plane, it's harder to stay united, and Huntress Wizard struggles with this in a way that the native spiritual beings here do not. We see this with one spiritual being separating itself and connecting back together again on a whim. But Huntress Wizard has to actually try really hard in order to maintain her existence in this realm, and inevitably she falls apart into her different seeds. These seeds then spread across the multiverse to the familiar dimensions that we saw in previous seasons. Now, I'm not gonna lie, after this happened, it was kind of extremely disappointing that we didn't see Huntress Wizard go to all these different dimensions. But if I had to guess, even if that was the original plan for this season, they decided to change it at some point because of how similar it would be to the previous season with their dimension hopping storyline. It also would have used mostly these same dimensions, but I personally think it would have been good to go back to these dimensions and see how they're faring after Fionna and Cake's previous adventure in season 1. And with Huntress Wizard separating herself into all of these different seeds, she could have actually gone to these different dimensions and met these alternate versions of herself. But instead, this all seemed to be just a simple setup for the finale. Here, Huntress Wizard manages to reconcile with the leader of the Green Wizard Society, and returns to Finn with the intent of injecting him with enough magic to bring his body back to life. In order to do this, however, she can't just use her own power or even the power of the Heart of the Forest, but she has to connect with the different versions of herself that had been planted in all of the different dimensions. This is meant to reflect the Gnostic idea, which differs from a lot of the other initiation ceremonies by presenting the divine light that you are giving as being part of a whole that you once came from. The idea in Gnosticism is that you are trapped in a loop of reincarnations, because at first you had to rectify for your fall, your bad behavior that led you to fall into the lower world. Such as we saw with the story of the two brothers, the Cosmic Owl and the Karmic Worm. But you are supposed to, at the very least, return to the place that you started. And if you fell on purpose, potentially to rise to an even higher position than you started. With all of this in mind, the in-world equivalent to Jesus in Adventure Time is probably Finn himself, which makes sense as that's actually the case with most TV shows, or at least the ones that get spiritual and esoteric. And all of these different Adventure Time series are really just the story of his fall and eventual rise. Now, if we really want to connect the show to Gnosticism, we'd want to focus on the idea that Finn and others are being trapped on this planet longer than they should be. One thing I find interesting about Finn across the different shows of Adventure Time now is that there's this very strong emphasis on Finn only being on this planet because he chooses to be. We saw this in the episode Catalyst Comet, where he decides to stay in Oo instead of going on to be something bigger like his father seems to be doing. And then again in Distant Lands, when we find out that Finn's going to die one day, but that he manages to convince Jake to go back and reincarnate with him. And finally, this entire second season of Fionna and Cake dealt largely with the idea that Finn wants to move on. Huntress Wizard manages to use all of her power from across the dimensions in order to bring Finn's body back to life, but that doesn't bring his soul back. The thing is, in order to return, you need some sort of attachment. And without Jake existing in the physical world anymore, the only real attachment that Finn had was to Huntress Wizard, and he felt like that they weren't truly connected. It was realizing that Huntress Wizard does want Finn in his life that caused him to return to his body once more. But in Gnosticism, there's a big focus on part of the reason we keep getting trapped in these life cycles, being that a higher being is actually trying to trick us into returning to the material world even when we don't. Normally, if there are things you still need to rectify, then you really have no choice but to return to the material world. But once you have properly rectified, it does become a choice, as we explained. And if someone is trying to stop you from ascending to a place that will cause them to fall from their own place, then it makes sense that such an entity would be trying to convince you to return to your life, even if for noble reasons, as the entire goal is just to keep you away from the spiritual realms. Right now, Finn seems to be making all of these choices on his own, and with Betty replacing Golb, it doesn't seem that Golb is actively trying to prevent Finn from rising up and taking on that role. But it does raise the question of whether or not there is some subtle influence that's causing Finn to stay on the Earth instead of returning from where he came, to continue playing pretend with these imaginary lives here on the planet Earth. But for now, this seems to be the perfect place to end this video on the lore and mythology of Adventure Time for Fionna and Cake. This video was a little rough to make around the holidays after the episode came out, as well as some other stuff going on in my life, so sorry if this video feels a little off, but it's something I wanted to make sure I tried to get done before the end of the year at least. I want to give a special thanks to my editor Haro for working on this video. We have a small team of editors that take turns working on different videos, but Haro has been behind most of these giant mega mythology videos that you see, and he really deserves a round of applause for all the hard work that goes into these bigger videos, because they're definitely a different beast to tackle than our regular sized ones. If you want more like this, we did start this entire trend of long mythology deep dives with a giant Adventure Time video. Though it was pretty early on in my introduction to esoterica and Adventure Time, so it may be very surface level compared to this video and what others might be expecting. But it does get into my musings of what the spirituality of Adventure Time feels like, even if it's not exactly what happens on screen. We also recently did a breakdown of the Atlantis 2 movie, which a lot of you were requesting after my video of Atlantis 1. And of course, over on our side channel Random Universe, we also have the Magical Girl Madoka video, where I get into how these mystery schools also inspired that anime. Both should be popping up here at the end of this video, and I'll include links in the description and the pinned comment down below. It's been nice to return to Adventure Time for a longer mythological video, even if I had a little bit of a struggle getting it done with everything going on over the holidays. And however it came out, I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you next time.